Okay, let's talk a little bit about the evolution and the shift of the 5 operating modes you talk about in the book. And can you share a case study of that?
Well, I'm not so sure about a case study, but let me talk about the operating modes. Boards in the 20th century were largely country clubs, and they were shocking. I mean, I was a young attorney at the time, and I remember working with a board that had a lot of...
And these are public, private, not all across the board, all different types of boards.
All different.
Run the same way?
All different, yes. And I would say today, you will not see that in the public company world so much, other than the odd founder situation. Okay, sometimes if you have a founder, they're still sort of populating the board with people they know, and because of their founder status, they have sort of a wider berth than someone else running a public company. In nonprofits, we still see it a little bit if it's a very prestigious organization like a very well-regarded museum or university. Being on the board is kind of considered a perk or something like very glamorous, and I've sort of seen those boards still in what I call country club mode. But for most of the world, country club mode is a 20th century artifact. At that time frame, people viewed being on the board largely as a reward and not as a job. And they hardly raised really difficult issues. I mean, some did, but most didn't. What we saw was that the pivot point for that was Enron. And once Enron fell, that was a wake-up call for boards not only across the United States, but around the world. And that's where we started to see boards say, this is a real job and this is an important job. And we've seen a lot of shift over the last 20 years as boards have moved solidly away from country club mode. How most boards today operate in the S&P 1500 is what I would call reporting out mode. So here's how this works. You're the CEO, I'm on the board, you're gonna come and say, here's my proposal, here's what I wanna do, you'll lay it all out, and then you'll say, any questions? And then if I start to ask you some questions, you're a bit defensive because your goal in this discussion is to not get derailed. You've already decided this is what you want to do.
And in the old days, you always got what you wanted.
In the old days, you always got what you want. Okay, what's going on now, our boards are challenging, as they should. But what it's doing is creating sort of a defensive dynamic. I mean, for executives, victory is getting out of the boardroom unscathed. Is that really harvesting the talent at your board table? It's not. You're defending against that. So the shift that I see us making in the third decade of the 21st century, which is what we're into now, is a shift to what I call collaborative oversight. So the board is still asking those tough questions and engaging in that sort of oversight. But there's more of a dynamic where it's a collaborative relationship and management is genuinely looking to leverage the expertise and good thinking of the board on some of their issues because they're going to get a lot more value from them in doing that. Now, there's a number of prerequisites before you can get there. Interestingly, during COVID, boards shifted to something I often call micromanagement, which is when there's a crisis. It's all hands on deck. Now often those crises were the CEO was hit by a bus, or there was a product failure. Boeing is a great example. Or there was some other kind of scandal or crisis. Right. And when that happens, the board will roll up their sleeves and try to help management navigate that. So they start micromanaging, and at that point, it's kind of okay. Now, we saw a number of boards shift into that mode during COVID, because for many companies, it really was a crisis. They had issues with their employees, they had issues with credit lines, they had all kinds of problems. So we've seen a lot of boards sort of shifting over there. What will be interesting is, do they go all the way back to that kind of reporting out defensive mode that they were probably in before? Or do they settle on more of this collaborative oversight, where it's more of a partnership between them and management, even though they're also asking tough questions? That's where I think we're going to go.
So you think that's the land in the middle of that happy medium?
I hope they do, because I think that's where boards can add a lot more value. I think where we were a couple of years ago was just largely this reporting out thing. And I think if we shift to that collaborative oversight, it's much more beneficial for not only the executive teams, but for the people that invest in those companies and have stakes in those companies.